Wants to tackle really urgent issues and challenges in the education space. Amna A. Fatemi is with us. She is Associate Director of Strategy at Community Jameel, based here in Dubai. Can you tell us a little bit about the organisation, why it was set up, and what was the goal at that point?
Sure, yeah. So, Community Jameel, we're an international organization, like you said. Our main goal is to kind of utilize and leverage the power of science, data, and technology to solve, the greatest challenges of our time. Whether it's preparing for the future of work or, adapting to climate change.
So just the small issues, just the little stuff. This feels almost like insurmountable. Is there one area in particular that you were focused on from the beginning?
I think part of it was that we wanted to give back to the community, and so we wanted to make sure that there was a lot of, a focus on economic empowerment. And we realized quite quickly that there's a lot of different areas that you can tackle, and that they're kind of all spilling over into each other, and there's a lot of kind of connections. So climate is impacting people's health, and people's health is impacting people's ability to get an education and their livelihoods. And so we tried to leverage the power of science and really kind of utilize research to help solve these challenges.
And getting there early as well with that education idea. I think a lot of what you're doing, which you're going to be finding out about, is about doing things slightly differently. You're part of the Rewired Summit, which is, talking about open learning in the Arab world. How would you describe open learning for people that are perhaps unfamiliar with the concept or have an idea of something that might be from years ago?
Sure, yeah. Open learning as a concept has evolved over time. It started off maybe kind of digitizing content, making content available online. And now I think it's really shifted from just kind of online to really opening up the educational institutions, the admissions process, finding alternative pathways for people to kind of enter into educational institutions in a way and acquire the skills, the competencies, and the certificates that they need to be able to compete in the labor market.
So open as in making things hopefully more accessible to more people and kind of leveling the playing field a little bit.
Yeah, definitely. Access is a huge constraint, and I think quality is another one. So how can we make sure that while we're opening it up, we're still kind of maintaining that level of quality that the labor market needs and that people actually deserve?
Yeah, absolutely. When we look at the job market now, I wouldn't want to be a fresh graduate, to be honest. It's very, very competitive, and we're going to be talking a little bit about how things are being done differently, how it's evolving with the times. But come back to the Rewired Summit. What's that all about?
So yeah, the Rewired Summit was held over the last couple of days this week, brought in a lot of different experts, people from all around the world. We hosted a roundtable around kind of open learning in the Arab world. We realized kind of early on that this is something where the rest of the world kind of is really advancing on opening up. COVID has really kind of helped open up science, especially, and there's a lot that we can learn as being in the Arab world. And I think that we wanted to open it up for universities to come and have a conversation, just a frank conversation about some of the challenges that they're facing, whether it was during COVID or in the post-COVID world, and how we can, as an organization, support those efforts.
What were some of your big kind of takeaways that you'd be happy to share now that you think we could potentially be excited about in the future?
Yeah, two main takeaways. I'd say the first one is that there are already really interesting case studies in the Arab world. So we heard from His Excellency Dr. Al who's the Undersecretary of the Ministry of Education here in the UAE, talking about the UAE's efforts in building a consortium of universities to help kind of create that accreditation for online learning, all the way to the American University of Beirut and their efforts in kind of opening up learning. And we also had with us a member for the executive director of the Jameel World Education Lab at MIT, and MIT has been really a pioneer in open learning. I think it had started in the late 90s, really opening up their education and their content, and now kind of looking back at that journey, they talked a little bit about some of the lessons that they learned in that journey, how Arab universities can benefit from those lessons and take those forward.
I find it fascinating to think about people coming together in places like Expo 2020, having conversations that, like, it really is connecting minds. It really is people getting an understanding of how are you doing things? How did that work? What was your big learning? How could we apply that? And then us as the general public only seeing the fruits of those conversations and labour potentially years later. Genuinely find it really, really fascinating. Education is such, as I said, a hot topic right now. Speaking as a parent, I really had hugely underestimated the power of teachers and educators until I had to do it myself. And I just wondered, how do you feel the pandemic has impacted people, and perhaps not in the young years, but maybe changing our thoughts about open learning for students in that 18 upwards, but also maybe that midlife space as well?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you. I think the pandemic has really kind of illuminated the challenges that people have had in accessing quality education. There was a huge push, obviously, to move things online. A lot of countries tried to do it quite quickly in response to the crisis. And I think that now we're kind of thinking about, okay, what's next? How are we going to be able to do this in the post-pandemic future? Is there always going to be a hybrid model? And I think that the pandemic has also created a push for technological innovations and ways that maybe hadn't before around engaging students and making the educational experience online as engaging as if it were in person.
And I think for me, I loved university. It was great. It was a lot of fun. And I think about the students of the last couple of years who might have been paying for the accommodation that they've never used, really mourning on the fact they haven't been able to have those social interactions. And it's been an incredibly, incredibly tough time. I wondered to get your take on the challenges of open learning. What are some of the things that you, Jameel, need to be aware of, tackling? Is it about public perception? Is it about the logistics and the actual physical rolling out of these programs? What are you looking at dealing with head on?
Yeah, so I think there's a couple of things. One is obviously the quality, and kind of, we talked a lot in the session about accreditation and the importance of that. The other one I'd say is making sure that the content is engaging, that the students are actually learning from the experience, and they're not just kind of, putting everything on mute and just,
scrolling on their phones when they should be in a lecture.
Yeah. And I think I'd say the last one, and this is kind of from the university's perspective, is how can you get, and this was a big question that we asked in the session yesterday, is how can we get the faculty and the teaching staff as well engaged in that process and actually putting their content online and engaging with the students, because it's not the same, like you said, as when you're in person.
It really isn't. And, having spoken to teachers who were doing that distance learning and navigating a completely different way of learning, and I say this as someone who is used to having, guests in the studio like we are now, presenting the show through a screen is incredible in some ways, because you get to access, much in the same way, professors, experts from all over the world, different time zones, people that you could never get in front of you because of the logistics of global travel. But it's also a completely different discipline of interviewing someone, of meeting someone. If I've got someone who's nervous, who's never been on the radio before, it's so nice to be able to look at them and give an encouraging face. Or equally, if you've got someone who will not stop talking, to be able to kind of give those cues and clues. And teachers said exactly the same. You're not able to pick up on the nuances of a classroom, and they missed being around the kids an awful lot as well. So that kind of face-to-face has got so many pluses. Do you think it's going to be a blended approach then for the rest of our days?
Yeah, I think so. I guess the thing is I think also where the concept of open learning is also kind of evolving, and one of the things that was discussed yesterday as well was this idea around the institutional culture around open. And so, for example, the Jameel World Education Lab at MIT talked about how, because they created this blended approach of a micromasters that was...
a micromasters? What's a micromasters?
So a micromasters is you take half the degree online, so through kind of an online, fully online and asynchronous proctored exam, and then if you are able to finish that and achieve the grades that are necessary to complete, then you can go to MIT and actually a couple of other universities around the world and finish your master's, but you can do it in a much shorter time. So it is a blended approach, and one of the things that they mentioned was that they opened up pathways to students that probably wouldn't have been able to access MIT from the get-go to go for a master's, but they were able to do it. Yeah, and so they had, I think, almost 200 students who had completed that in the last couple of years.
We're talking about the future of education, especially in the open learning space. space with Amna Al-Fatani. She is the Associate Director of Strategy at Community Jameel, and they've been having some big chats this week as part of Expo's Knowledge and Learning Week. Any questions for her, do get in touch. Share your thoughts on open learning. Is this something you would think about visiting in your mid-career, or if you've got student-age children, or in fact you are of that age group yourself? Let us know your thoughts on 4001. Up next, what are some of the most prominent education initiatives being launched by Community Jameel in the region, and what can the rest of them learn from the UAE?
This is Dubai Eye 103.8.
Is with us, the Associate Director of Strategy at Community Jameel. And kind of, I find it really interesting to think about Expo, because we see it as guests. I mean, obviously we're here presenting the show, but visitors come and tour the pavilions and, eat and are entertained. And then there's organisations such as yourself, and it comes back to that kind of connecting mind, creating the future message that we hear, but it really is happening. So tell us a little bit about, and we'll come back to the education thing. Amna, what have you been enjoying about Expo with both a visitor hat on and a professional hat on?
I've really enjoyed visiting Expo. I came with my family a couple of weeks ago, and not to be biased, but I did really like the Saudi pavilion.
It's very impressive.
It was very impressive. The food was amazing. I urge everyone to check it out. I think they had running out of ice cream from all the yummy flavors. I think it's like what you were saying. It's just a convening power of bringing all these nations together, bringing all these people to our experts today. This week at Rewired. You get to learn a lot, and so I think just come in with an open eye and mind and just listen on.
I think that's exactly right. There's something to see, do, learn around every single corner. Yes, there are some amazing photo opportunities and some brilliant food as well, but we heard earlier from Ronald, the Expo grandpa, who's been to 16 different expos, and that's what he was saying. So he just loves going into the pavilions. It's not just about going and getting your stamp, but it's about actually having conversations with people who are experts in their field, who are from different countries. And as I said, education has been a real crux this week in our Knowledge and Learning Week. What do you think the rest of the region could learn from the UAE in the education space, Amna?
I think the UAE has really been leading regionally, but I think also globally, pioneering. I mean, we heard from the Ministry of Education, they were talking about this university consortium that they've been leading, really helping universities kind of make the most of what the UAE has to offer, but then also offer kind of from the UAE to the world. We had previously partnered with an organization in Sharjah, the Arab Science and Technology Foundation, creating a fund for scientific research and innovation from the Arab world. And it was just, you kind of see everything around you. The UAE is, I think, just doing so much, and there's a lot that we can learn as an organization, bring it to the world, and kind of really export some of the things that UAE is doing.
So what can we look forward to, some of the education initiatives that are being launched by Community Jameel? Is there anything you can talk about?
Yeah, so we have a program in Jordan that's just currently running called TREE, which is about transforming refugee education, and that's kind of taking a really pioneering approach that was developed by the MIT Jabil World Education Lab called the Compassionate Systems, and it's like a teacher's professional development program that helps teachers using compassion kind of take care of their own mental well-being in an education system that's been overburdened by crisis with refugee influx, and actually improve the quality of teaching, but then also improve the quality of learning for the students, and that's kind of what matters.
Well, thank you so much for coming in today. As I said, really interesting to hear about some of the conversations been happening perhaps behind the scenes, away from those who aren't in the industry, that could very well be impacting how and where we learn in the future. Amna, really appreciate your time. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Amna joining us from Community Jameel. We are turning our attentions